But I love Christmas. There is a real risk, however, this time of year, that we will wrap Christmas around us like a warm blanket. A blanket of nostalgia, a blanket of sentimentality, and will obscure what it really means. And the text that we read as we lit the Advent candle, the text Michael read for us, Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7, that's going to be the text on which this teaching is based. So if you have your Bible, I'd invite you to turn it on and scroll to Isaiah. And I'm going to refer back to that passage because it really does capture the weight of Advent. My goal for this morning, and I'm going to show you my cards up front, it is if you're a Christian, if you identify as somebody who follows Jesus, my whole goal this morning is to wake you up. Wake you up to the real meaning of Advent. Because Advent, for centuries, it's a Latin word that means arrival, right? We're Christians for centuries have used this season to contemplate and consider the arrival of Jesus, the baby born in a food trough, and its significance for us. And I would argue that there are kind of forces conspiring to pull the wool over our eyes, to make this season all about, warm sentimentality and mistletoe and the commercial enterprise that is Christmas. But if you're a Christ follower, I want to maybe reach back to our roots and view Advent with fresh eyes. If you're not a Christ follower, well, here I want you to be aware and maybe even wake up to the incredible hope we have because of Advent, because of Christmas. The first candle that we lit is the candle of hope. And so there is a tremendous bulletproof hope that is not only possible, but logical in light of Christmas. And so let's dive into it. We read from Isaiah 9, 2 through 7, and this is one of the most famous messianic prophecies. Now you hear that term and maybe it sounds a little confusing. You're like, what is that? A messianic prophecy, all through the Hebrew scriptures, all the way back to Genesis, there is the expectation. Sometimes it's overt. This is one of those texts where it's pretty apparent, and sometimes it's pretty subtle. But over 50 times in the Hebrew scriptures, there is the promise of a figure that's come to be known as the Messiah. This individual would come and he would be a king like no other king. He would be a king that power doesn't actually corrupt. He would actually fulfill his campaign promises. That he would bring an everlasting peace, that he would mediate some kind of a peace between people and God that couldn't be infringed or impinged upon. There is this promise of a Messiah, and then there's another 300 places in the Old Testament where it's a little, it's a little less explicit. It's more of he's hanging in the margins. But this text that we read in Isaiah, it says some interesting stuff, that there really is a hero of the story. The reason that the Hebrew people, and the reason that all people, glom onto this idea that there really would be a king like you've never expected. He was going to be just in a way you could never anticipate. He's going to be righteous and holy in a way that you couldn't possibly imagine. He's going to redeem people, and not just for a moment in history or for a night, but forever and ever. The Hebrew people understood that these prophecies were all looking forward to somebody. And there's a reason that every single culture has heroes. There's a reason that we love fairy tales. There's a reason that we glom onto campaign promises. And there is a reason why all cultures around the world and throughout the centuries celebrate these myths that have very similar DNA, right? This is the reason, by the way, I love the Star Wars movies. Same story. there really would be somebody who would bring unity to the force. The Marvel movies, same thing. There really would be an Iron Man to, make everything sad come on true. This is universal, and it goes across all of cultures and throughout history. And the reason that everybody loves these stories, the reason that all cultures have some variation of this myth or these fairy tales is because there's an echo. There's an echo in every single person. That there's an echo that this story is more than just a story. It's more than just a fairy tale. There's really no English word for this longing that we all sense and experience. There is, however, a German word, which I took great pains to learn and pronounce correctly for you. It's Sehnsucht. That took me a little longer than you might expect. Sehnsucht. It's this feeling that and you'll recognize it. It's a home that we long for that you've never seen, right? I'll give you an example. When I grew up in Eastern Long Island, and my family had an ancestral home, and my grandparents lived in it. My dad lives there now. And when I was a little kid, we would go out there during the summer and visit, and I remember the great room, and I thought it was impossibly large with these huge vaulted ceilings and a fireplace that was so big that you could walk inside of it, and this roaring flame, and that there was a creepy deer mounted over it that used to scare the tar out of me. And then we'd walk down to the beach, and I remember that walk, it felt like it was 20 or 30 miles. And there were sand dunes that we would play on as a kid. And I in my mind's eye, those things might as well have been the Himalayas. When I was in my 20s and I went back to visit, I remember I hadn't been there in some time. I walked in, and that great room wasn't that great. It was a lot smaller than I remembered it. In fact, it was the size of a large shed, and that fireplace was actually quite small. And I thought, had my mind betrayed me? And then I remember walking down to the beach and walking along the shore down to the creek, and it wasn't miles long. It was like a couple hundred yards. In my mind, in my heart of hearts, I'm longing for something. I'm longing for a home that I've never been to. I'm longing for a sunset that I've never seen. There's a Sehnsucht in all of us that crave for something that, and C.S. Lewis says it, he says it beautifully. He captures it in The Weight of Glory. I won't read the whole quote for you. He says, or maybe I will. The books or music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them, it only came through them, and what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if we are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. For they are not the thing itself, they are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, and news from a country we have never visited. There is an echo. There is a yearning. There is something in our hearts that tells us that things will not always be as they are. And this is precisely what Isaiah has given us. He has given us this word of revelation from God that you're right, the deepest longings of your heart, this instinct you have that the world is dark and the world is ugly, but things won't always be like this. There really is a hero to this story, and things will not always be the same. Isaiah has given us a picture of it. And his first statement is that the world is full of darkness. Now, I didn't know how much I really have to belabor this point, but let's just talk about it briefly here. The word in verse 2 that's used, it says, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned." That word in Hebrew, the deep darkness, is literally the death shadow. There is a shadow of death over everyone and everything. And you sense it, don't you? I think the challenge this time of year is that I go into the Christmas season and I'm pumped. We went out, I'm once again, Thanksgiving Eve, after we ate the turkey, I'm blasting Burl Ives on the stereo. That morning, before lunch, we had the tree up. We're decorating the tree, and I'm all about it. I love it. I love the kids at the mall with the Santa Claus hats on. I love the whole thing. Claymation reindeer. I actually get sad on December 26th because we can't play Christmas music anymore. It's like somebody lets it out of my sails. Here's my caution. You could wrap yourself in sentimentality like a warm blanket and miss the fact that we are in genuine darkness. And this is something that, this is something that all thought streams and all philosophies try to contend with. There is, and the way that most of us contend with it, the way that, I'd say the commercial Christmas enterprise out there in the world tries to contend with it, is just drink more eggnog, sing more songs, give more presents, and we're really just going to find Christmas in ourselves somewhere, in the better angels of our nature. We're going to be a little kinder and a little gentler and a little more forgiving this time of year. And so Christmas becomes about sentimentality instead of being what it really truly is. The earth is plunged into darkness. And there was no hope that we were going to somehow manifest salvation from within ourselves. Try as we might to be a little kinder and a little gentle and a little more patient this one time of year. You know as well as I do that on December 26th, everybody flips that switch off. So what are we to do? Well, there's, I would say the non-theistic framework is pretty honest about it. Bertrand Russell's a famous atheist. He wrote in his book, A Man's Free Worship. He's been, at least if nothing else, he's been honest. You may think it's a little pessimistic, but at least it's honest. This is what he says. He says, man is the product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. That his origin, his growth, his hopes, his fears, his loves, and his beliefs are but outcomes of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. According to Russell, only when you come to this realization that everything is burning down, there really is a darkness in the world, and it's somewhat inescapable. It's the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy applied to systems like the solar system or systems like your body, everything's breaking down. There is no escape, and so only when we're realistic about that can you have any kind of philosophical foundation. That's what Russell says. Some people come to Christianity and they think, well, that's just a tool and a crutch for weak-minded people. That's something that people who, they're simple-minded and maybe they're afraid to die, and so they've adopted this paradigm, and it's unrealistic. It's pie in the sky when I die. With all due respect, I think the Christian framework is absolutely realistic. And sometimes frames it even more pessimistic than Bertrand Russell. What Isaiah is saying here is that there is a death shadow, and it is hanging over every single person. That you've got no hope unless light breaks in from the outside. There's no way that you could somehow conjure this. I mean, think of Israel's story. They would raise up the Israel story, by the way. You could tell it in the context of exile. That's a little complicated. Let me unpack this. If you remember the story of the Exodus, the Hebrews were enslaved for hundreds of years. God raised up Moses. He was a hero. He rescues them through Moses, brings them through the desert, ultimately into the promised land. It has been argued that this story of exile, the story of Exodus, is far more than just that one little chapter in the Bible. That it's actually the story of every man, woman, and child who's ever lived. That all of us were born into slavery of a sort. And all of us are kind of incapable of self-rescue. We need the hero. We need the hero from the fairy tales, the hero from the myths, the one that echoes in our heart's memory. We need this person because we're not going to be able to break through the darkness on our own. And so in the time of Isaiah, people were turning to anything and everything but God to answer all of their questions. And just before this, in chapter 8, Isaiah 8, they were turning not to God but to mediums. In Isaiah 8, it says, when someone tells you to consult mediums and spirits who whisper and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? They had turned to coping strategies that were anything but God. And we think, oh, these people so primitive. I'm glad we've somehow evolved out of this primordial ooze that would have them turn to some other coping strategy besides God. But we have shopping, we have achievement, we have substances. We haven't changed at all. And there are a million things that we will try to do to address the existential angst by the darkness. We're all aware of it. We're all aware of it. And here's what is completely possible. To look at the trees, to look at the lights, to look at the presents, and to think things aren't really that bad. It's not dark. Maybe it's just a little dim. But hey, it's Christmas and we're lighting candles. The world is dark and if we need light from outside to save ourselves. All the coping strategies, all the nostalgia, all the Bing Crosby on the radio, none of it is really going to address that. You might be able to do enough mental gymnastics to convince yourself for the next 4 weeks that things really aren't that bad. But the message of the Bible, the message of Isaiah, the entire narrative of the Bible is one that it says everybody was born in a bondage. You are enslaved to sin, entropy, and death. And we're incapable of manifesting any kind of interior light that's somehow going to be bright enough to pierce the darkness. But the hero, it's true. All the stories are true. The myths and the legends, they're true. The deepest longings of your heart are actually addressed, and that light has come into the world. Now, that brings me to the second point, light. Verse 2 says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. The word dawn doesn't quite convey the original language. It's a light flashed. There was an explosion of light in the darkest of nights. I remember I was looking for something in my driveway recently, and I forgot which kid was in the car, but they decided they were going to help me out. And it was at nighttime, and it was dark, and they thought they'd just turn on their brights. Did that ever happen to you? All of a sudden, I'm instantly blinded and stumbling around. That's what's in view here. There was utter darkness. We were incapable of saving ourselves. And you look at the story of Israel. There was redemption. There was God. There was oppression. There was sin. There was darkness. God raises up a hero, brings Israel out, and then it doesn't last. You're back there again in a day, in a month, in a year, and there was no lasting rescue. All of a sudden, into this, a light is flashed, a light explosion in the darkness. Now, we think Christmas is potentially finding a light within ourselves, right? I feel like there's a couple of commercials that will float around this time of year that all kind of suggest this, that like we're just gonna dig deep and we're gonna white knuckle it for the next 5 weeks and try to be the best possible versions of ourselves and spread a little holiday cheer. What this says is that is completely unrealistic. It's unrealistic. There's nothing that you're gonna be able to manifest this. In fact, it could do the opposite. Let me show you how. If you think that this is something that you can manifest, some inner light that you can kind of create rather than something coming in from outside and changing you, one of two things will happen. You'll become arrogant. You'll think, look at me, I'm spreading holiday cheer. I've been so positive and so patient and so forgiving and so kind. In fact, I'm the living, breathing example of the Christmas spirit, and I wish everybody else could get on board. and you'll become unbelievably arrogant. And you'll look down on people who maybe aren't as self-disciplined as you. Or the flip side of that coin is this, is that you'll become acutely aware of the fact that whatever light you're trying to kindle in yourself to try to pierce the darkness of the world is not quite cutting it. That you had a moment of generosity and a moment of patience, but then you lost your cool in traffic on a Monday, or you said an unkind word to your spouse or your children. And you think, oh, darn, there it is. The light done went out. So there's two options. You're either going to become self-absorbed and arrogant, or you'll be torn down and destroyed. But there is a light. And this whole theme of exile through the scriptures, you find out in Revelation 21. I remember when I first came to the Bible, I skipped to the end. That's what I did in high school. I read the first couple of pages, and then I skipped to the end to see how it ended. So I ended up reading Genesis and then skipping to Revelation, which is probably not the way to do it. But in Revelation 21, the very last thing that's written in the Bible is Revelation 21 and 22. It starts in Genesis 1 and 2. There is the story of how this darkness ultimately ends. And then it says in Revelation 21 that Jesus descends from the throne, and he says, I will dry every tear from every eye, and I will be with them, and I will be their people, or they will be my people, and I will be their God. He says, I'm making all things new. And we find out that exile story, that story of bondage and redemption, isn't just the story of Israel, and it's not just the story that Isaiah is kind of giving to his people. It's the story of everyone. It's the story, and be honest for a minute. The redemption that's possible here, it's not something that you somehow muster up the will for. It's not something that you think, this is what I thought when I became a Christian. Now I'm a Christian, I got to straighten up and fly right. Now you should stop sinning. Don't go home today and say, the pastor said you don't have to stop sinning. You should try to live as holy a life as possible. But I promise you, the more acutely you're aware of who Jesus is the more acutely you're aware of how much you're incapable of being perfect to the standard that he was. It's a perfect standard. You cannot keep it. The rub is, look at the tense. Look at the tense here. It says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you. This is all past tense. This means something has been done. It's not something like, hey team, we got to get it together and really try hard and we're somehow going to get there. No, something has been done. This is a proclamation of good news. Isaiah is giving us news that God is doing something new, and the gospel is, in its essence, good news. It means this is something to respond to. This is not more harder work to undertake. It's something to respond to. Now, when you hear the good news, now everything in your life becomes a response to it. It's not that I'm going to try to work really hard and summons the Christmas spirit in order to, deal more kindly and patiently and lovingly with the people around me. That inverts the whole principle. The principle is this, is that I was born into slavery. I had the boot of oppression on my neck. I was incapable of saving myself, but then God sent a child. And that child changed everything because he really is the hero that my heart always longed for. He really does make a way for me to know God in a personal way. How? Because on the cross, Jesus pays the price, the sin debt that I incurred with his blood, and now I can come before God, not as a creation of God, but as a child of God, and be the recipient of all the privileges thereunto pertaining. This is really good news. Now, in verse 7, it says, the zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. This is really important because if you think it's something that you're going to do by your own strength, you'll either become downtrodden, You'll either become extremely anxious, oh no, I don't know if I did it, or you're going to be really angry. You're going to think, I do it, why can't the rest of these people do it? This is the antithesis of that. And this brings me to kind of the final point here. There is darkness. There is incredible light exploding on the horizon in Jesus. And the response, how do we respond to this? Two things, and the first is this: be humble. Be humble. Now, I know if you're anything like me, you think Christmas is, it's an opportunity for celebration. Yes, 100%. It's an opportunity to bless those around you in maybe uncommon ways that remember the blessing that we had through Jesus. Yes. But it is the most humbling thing you can possibly imagine, isn't it? It has been said that Jesus is the reason for the season, right? Theologically, this is sort of true. It might be more accurate to say that I'm the reason for the season. I was actually that lost. I was actually that hopeless. That it took Jesus, the second member of the Trinity, who was wrapped in and embraced with God and the Father since time immemorial and enjoyed a kind of community that we can scarcely comprehend, that he left the comfort of heaven and was born in a food trough to one of the most disenfranchised people groups that has ever lived. It's humbling. It took nothing less than the death of Jesus to see my sins paid for. I was that far gone. I couldn't have squared the account on my own. There was nothing that I was going to manifest in myself. Christmas cheer, glad tidings, better angels of my nature. There was nothing I could possibly do because even my best motives are riddled with pride. Right? How many times you help somebody this time of year? Maybe you give a little more money to charity than usual, and then the first thing you do is pat yourself on the back. That's what I do. And then the reflexive response we have when we do good, when we're patient, when we're kind, when forgiving, is to think that somehow because of this, God owes us. And the reality is, there's no way we could possibly square the account. And look, every time, because what you functionally do when you're giving and you're with your generosity, with your kindness, with your forgiveness, with your moral example, even. And you think that, well, look at me, God. Now, isn't this, aren't I something? I'm sure that I'm in. I'm sure that I'm going to grace you with my presence. That completely inverts the order. The gospel is that Jesus came into the world. You were in darkness. You were incapable of somehow conjuring or manifesting any kind of light. The darkness was so impenetrable. You have moments of brilliance, but a lot of them are self-serving. You do things in order to get God to bless you, and that's really not love. That's just a boss that you work really hard for. And the good news is that he saw us and he sent his son. What does it say? It says in verse 6. In verse 6 is the announcement. Let me get here real quick. Verse 6 is the announcement. It says, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. There is, you look at these titles where it says Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and the temptation is to think that these are all like kind of separate attributes of Christ. But what they really are is one long descriptive title. It'd be like if you've ever watched those movies set in like, Dungeons and Dragons-esque times, and people get these really long titles. Like I would be Jeff, husband of Allie, father of Jake, Luke, Caleb, and Jason, ruler of the kingdoms of the north, or something like that. That's what this is. This is one long title. And apparently, it belongs to a child. Now, if you think about this, Jesus was born to peasants. He is the child of Mary, who at the time is probably 13 or 14 years old, given the customs of the day. So she is an unwed, teenage, expectant mom. And they're from Nazareth. right? What is in John's gospel, in John 1:46, they're talking about Jesus coming from Nazareth, and they say, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? That's because Nazareth was a backwater. This is podunk. This is the trailer park. Can anything good come from them? Look, think about this. If Jesus had shown up and he was like a king, an emperor, a military ruler, or like a hero in the traditional sense, we'd be very tempted to think that we had to work really, really hard for this. But he doesn't. He comes as a baby, the most vulnerable thing you can possibly imagine. Think about babies. What do? Nothing. They just sit there, and if you don't feed them and take really good care of them, they're going to die. And this is exactly how Jesus comes. He comes in the most humble, unassuming form. And the message is clear. If you want to have a relationship with him, you have to have the same kind of humility. You've got to lay all of your good deeds down. You've got to lay all of your striving down at the foot of the cross and have a conversation with God and say, like, there's nothing I could do to actually get you to love me. Rather, there's a perfect Savior. There's the hero, the one my heart's always longed for, was born and suffered and died in my place, and he paid for my sins so that I could stand before you. In light of his sacrifice, forgive me and accept me. That's all you need. That's all you need for Christmas to be the realest thing ever. For Jesus, the hero of all of I would argue that all of the stories and all the myths and all the fairy tales are actually about him. For that hero of the story to punch into the darkness in your life. Timothy Keller said it really well. He said, the only thing you really need to come to him is nothing, and very few people have it. So ultimately, it is humbling. The next thing, finally, is that it's hopeful. It's hopeful. It's unbelievably hopeful. Now, in verse 3, it says, you have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you. Think of how dark Israel was. They had been they're being oppressed, and they're looking to anything but God to solve all their existential issues. They're consulting mediums. There's real darkness. And then all of a sudden, a great light has dawned, and the very first reflexive thing that people do is rejoice. They rejoice. Imagine all of a sudden. Let's step back from it for a second. We are all trapped in the death shadow. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Great Divorce, says that people are occupying one of two narratives. He says that for people who do not know Jesus, they are walking through what he called the valley of the shadow of death. Very similar language. He's quoting the 23rd Psalm. The valley of the shadow of death. That there is a specter and a cloud hanging over all of us. And that try as we might, and all the wishful thinking in the world, and all the mental gymnastics we can do around the holiday season, to make things seem like they really aren't that bad. All the mental gymnastics in the world, all they're going to do is allow you to kind of pull the wool over your own eyes for a moment. But eventually, it's going to catch up with you. He says to the person who is a new creation in Christ, they are actually walking in what he calls the valley of the shadow of life. They have a life now because of Jesus that is so profound that not even entropy and death can overcome it. Right? This is incredibly hopeful. And it means that if the world is really that dark, and God kicked a hole in the pitiless walls of the world to make this light shine in it, that means, by extension, that nobody and nothing is hopeless. Whatever you walk through the door with, whatever addiction, whatever pain, whatever grief, and whatever loss, if this light, as it's been described here, really did flash across the world, oh my gosh, it means that nothing is ever really too broken, right? And I want you to notice this in these terms, wonderful counselor, mighty God. There's a bit of a debate in the original language, in the Hebrew, this is depicting a hero. It's describing this figure that everybody knew was out there, and they were hoping he would come at some point, set all things to rights. And the discussion is it a hero that has godlike qualities? The Hebrew language is pretty specific, though. It's not a hero that is like God. It's a hero that is God. If Jesus really is who the Bible said he was, then that means that God eschewed his privilege, that he completely disarmed himself of all of his power and his glory, and he was born to the lowliest of people in a food trough, and that he was an itinerant preacher for about 3 years before the Romans killed him. Euston Smith, when I was doing my undergrad, I was an atheist. I didn't believe. I thought this was a crutch for weak-minded people and a fairy tale for people who were just afraid to die. And I was doing my undergrad in English literature, and I had to take a class on comparative religions. This is a secular university. And they assigned a book, The World Religions by Euston Smith. He's a scholar out of Berkeley, of all places. And he wrote, the very last chapter of the book was on Christianity. And the very last paragraph of the very last chapter, when I finally, you believe I read the book? I'm kind of surprised by it. Never left me. It never left me. And this is what Smith writes. He says, Christianity is basically a historical religion. That is to say, it is founded not on abstract principles, but on concrete events, actual historical happenings. The most important of these is the life of a Jewish carpenter who, as has often been pointed out, was born in a stable, was executed as a criminal at age 33, never traveled more than 90 miles from his birthplace, owned nothing, attended no college, marshaled no army, and instead of producing books, did his only writing in the sand. Nevertheless, his birthday is kept across the world, and his death day sets a gallows against every skyline. No one else's life has so profoundly shaped the world. It's not an ideology, principally. It's not less than that. It's more than that. It's not a philosophy, principally. It's not less than that. It's more than that. It's not wishful thinking. The story of Advent, the Christmas story, is rooted in history. And so the question that particular paragraph posed to me all those years ago is the question I pose to you this morning. Who is this Jesus? There is no debate, no serious scholar believes that there wasn't a first century Galilean peasant named Jesus Christ who was a rabbi and an itinerant preacher who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. What happens next has all the ramifications in the world for you. It's the most important decision you'll ever make, is who do you think this person is? Was he just another victim in a long line of Roman cruelty? Or were the whispers true? Is he really the hero that your heart has always longed for? Is he really the one that would flash in the darkness and make a way for you to finally go home, the home you've always longed for and never been to? If the Christmas story is true, and I believe it is, and I believe I've spent 22 years looking at all the evidence, and I've never come to a compelling rationale that would provide for the birth of the early church, the conversion of the apostles, the resurrection of Jesus, all the eyewitnesses of the miraculous events of the first century. If it's true, then it means light has exploded in the darkness. And this Advent season, all you have to do is respond to it. This concludes the teaching of God's Word.